My name is Alex, I'm 32, and I'm a custom home builder. Yesterday, the piece of paper that officially ended my 10-year marriage to Sarah was finalized. I spent the night in a cheap, roadside motel with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a trapped hornet. It felt like the perfect setting for the end of the world, or at least, the end of mine. I was staring at the water-stained ceiling, tracing the cracks like a map to nowhere, when my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I ignored it. I knew what she wanted, what they always wanted. It was never about me, it was always about my brother, Leo. But this time was going to be different. They thought I was a failure, a small-time handyman whose marriage had just collapsed under the weight of his own mediocrity. They had no idea that the foundation of their comfortable world was about to crumble, and that I was the one holding the demolition papers. As I checked out the next morning, my hands trembling slightly as I pushed the key card across the counter, the receptionist, a kind-eyed woman in her late 50s, looked at me, then at the name on the receipt. A spark of recognition lit her face. She leaned forward and whispered, "Mr. Harrison? Forgive me for being forward, but I just have to say, my husband is an architect, and we adored the feature on your company in Modern Dwellings last month. The Lakeside project? Absolutely breathtaking." She pointed behind me. A courier was walking in, holding a flat, rectangular package. "I believe this is for you," she said, her voice full of a respect I had never once received from my own family. It was a framed copy of the magazine cover she was talking about. My company. My project. My success. In that dim, dusty motel lobby, at the absolute lowest point of my life, the proof of everything I had built in secret had finally caught up with me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my family's day of reckoning had just arrived. Before I continue with what happened next, with the phone call I was about to make that would change everything, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or treated like you were second best. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever had to fight to be seen by the very people who were supposed to see you all along. The roots of my invisibility were planted deep in the soil of my childhood. I grew up in a house where the sunlight of my parents' affection was reserved for one plant, and my brother Leo soaked it all up. He was the golden child, the charismatic, effortless son who could do no wrong. I was the other one. The responsible one. The one who was expected to simply exist in the shadows, quietly competent and endlessly reliable. Our family photo albums tell the whole story. Leo is always front and center, a dazzling smile on his face, holding a trophy, a diploma, a set of keys to a new car. I'm usually on the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, my expression a mixture of forced pleasantry and quiet resignation. I remember the summer I turned 16. I'd worked for months at a greasy diner, saving every greasy dollar, to buy my first car. It was a 10-year-old Toyota, rusted in places, with a tape deck that ate cassettes for breakfast. But it was mine. I had earned it. The day I brought it home, my father, Mark, barely glanced up from his newspaper. "Make sure your insurance is sorted," was all he said. 2 weeks later, Leo, who had been gifted a brand new convertible for his 18th birthday, wrapped it around a telephone pole while trying to impress his friends. There was no lecture. There were no consequences. There was just a sigh from my mother, Helen, and a quiet discussion with my father, and within a month, a new, even nicer car sat in the driveway. My role was clear. I was the family's resident handyman, mechanic, and IT support, all rolled into one. When the Wi-Fi went out, it was, "Alex, fix it." When my mother's computer got a virus, "Alex, can you look at this?" When Leo's college essays needed proofreading or his resume needed punching up, I was the go-to resource. Yet, my own achievements were met with deafening silence. I made the honor roll every semester. Leo barely passed his classes. I was captain of the mathletes, Leo was captain of the beer pong team. They threw a lavish party for his graduation from a business program he'd barely scraped through, a program my father's connections had gotten him into. When I graduated with honors from the state university, working 2 jobs to pay my own way, I got a firm handshake from my dad and a card from my mom with $20 inside. It wasn't about the money. It was about the message, loud and clear: your efforts are noted, but not valued. Your brother's existence, however, is to be celebrated. This pattern defined our lives, creating a chasm between us that felt impossible to cross. Leo grew into his entitlement, expecting the world to be handed to him on a silver platter, while I learned to expect nothing. It was a painful education, but it taught me the most valuable lesson of all: the only person I could ever truly rely on was myself. After college, I consciously chose a path they couldn't understand or influence. They'd wanted me to get a respectable office job, something safe and predictable. Instead, I put on a tool belt. I started at the bottom, working as a laborer for a small construction company run by a man named Gus. Gus was in his late 60s, with hands like gnarled oak and an eye for quality that bordered on obsessive. He was the father I'd always craved. He didn't care about charisma or flashy degrees, he cared about work ethic, integrity, and a straight cut. He saw something in me my own father never had: potential. "You've got the eye, kid," he'd grumble, after watching me remeasure a frame for the third time. "You don't just see a blueprint, you see the home." He taught me everything, not just how to build, but how to bid, how to manage a crew, how to read a client. When Gus decided to retire, he sold me the business for a fraction of its worth, holding the loan himself. "Pay me back when you can," he'd said. "Just don't screw up my name." I didn't. I renamed it Harrison Homes, but I kept his standards. I lived in a tiny apartment, drove my old Toyota until the wheels practically fell off, and poured every cent and every waking hour back into the company. To my family, I was just Alex, the contractor they imagined me patching drywall and fixing leaky faucets, a blue-collar disappointment. They'd make passive-aggressive comments at family dinners. "Are you getting enough work, dear?" my mother would ask with pity in her voice. Leo, who was bouncing between vaguely defined marketing jobs his father had arranged for him, would clap me on the shoulder and say, "Good for you, bro, honest work." The condescension was suffocating. They had no idea I was bidding on and winning multi-million-dollar custom home projects. They didn't know I was building a reputation among the city's elite for quality and design. My secret success was my shield. It was the one part of my life they couldn't touch, couldn't belittle, couldn't take credit for. During this time, I met Sarah. She was a landscape architect, and we were paired on a project. She saw me. She saw the passion, the dedication, the quiet pride I took in my work. She also saw the toxic dynamic with my family from our very first Christmas together. She saw how I shrank in their presence, how their casual dismissals cut me to the quick. She loved me, and for years, she was my fiercest defender. But the poison of my family was slow acting. Their constant demands, their relentless prioritization of Leo, the way they drained my energy and spirit, it started to seep into the foundations of our marriage. She couldn't stand watching me absorb their cruelty, and I didn't know how to stop it. My secret success was my armor, but it was also a wall between us. I couldn't share my biggest triumphs with her without risking my family finding out, and the thought of their greedy hands reaching for what I had built was a nightmare I wasn't ready to face. Back in the present, I stood in that motel lobby, the framed magazine cover heavy in my hand. The receptionist's words echoed in my ears, words of validation from a complete stranger that meant more than a lifetime of faint praise from my parents. My phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. It was my mother, her voice tight with a manufactured panic I knew all too well. "Alex? Finally! Why didn't you answer? We've been trying to reach you all day." I didn't mention the divorce. I knew they wouldn't care. I just said, "I was busy, Mom." "What's wrong?" The story came tumbling out, a frantic narrative of woe that was painfully familiar. Leo, the business prodigy, had done it again. His latest venture, some kind of boutique import business funded by yet another loan my parents had co-signed, had imploded. He hadn't just lost their investment, he'd racked up enormous debts with suppliers and now faced lawsuits. The creditors weren't just after Leo anymore, they were coming for my parents. The bank was threatening foreclosure on the family home, the very house I'd grown up in, the stage for all my years of being overlooked. The entitlement in her voice was staggering. There was no apology for bothering me, no consideration that I might have my own life, my own problems. It was a demand disguised as a plea. "Alex, you have to help us," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Leo needs $200,000. To make this go away," I almost laughed. $200,000. To them, it was an impossible sum, a number plucked from the sky. They figured, at best, that my little business and my frugal nature meant I might have 20 or 30,000 saved up. They weren't asking me to contribute, they were asking me to perform a miracle. "We know you've always been so responsible with your money," she continued, the irony so thick it was practically choking me. "And now that you and Sarah... Well, now that you don't have those expenses, you're our only hope. It's your duty as a son. You have to fix this for your brother." Duty. The word hung in the air between us. My duty had always been to be the stable, invisible pillar holding up their pedestal for Leo. My duty was to be their safety net, the one they could ignore until they were falling. The rage that had been simmering inside me for 30 years began to boil. They hadn't just ignored me, they had rendered me invisible. And now, they expected me to pay for the privilege. "I'll come over," I said, my voice eerily calm. "We should discuss this in person." I agreed to meet them at the house. The house they were about to lose. As I drove, I didn't feel nervous, I felt a strange, cold clarity. The years of swallowing my anger, of accepting my role, were over. I wasn't the 16-year-old kid hoping for a nod of approval anymore. I was the man who had built an empire in the shadows they had cast. When I walked in, the scene was exactly as I'd pictured. My mother, Helen, was pacing the living room, wringing her hands. My father, Mark, sat in his favorite armchair, his face a mask of grim authority, as if he were presiding over a business failure instead of a family catastrophe. And there, on the sofa, was Leo. Even now, on the brink of ruin, he managed to look smug, and smirk playing on his lips as if this were all just a temporary inconvenience that his lesser-known brother was obligated to clean up. "Alex, thank God you're here," my mother began, rushing toward me. "Did you go to the bank? What can you give us?" My father cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Let him talk, Helen." He looked at me, his gaze evaluative. "Son, the situation is dire. Leo made some mistakes, but his family. We need you to step up." Leo finally spoke, not even bothering to stand. "Yeah, bro, time to pull your weight. You owe us. Dad helped you out with that handyman business of yours, didn't he?" The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it almost took my breath away. He was referring to a $2,000 loan they'd given me years ago for a new set of power tools, a loan I'd paid back with interest within 6 months. That was the extent of their investment in me. I looked from his smirking face to my father's expectant one, and I knew this was it. This was the moment. I calmly placed the framed magazine cover I'd brought from the motel on the coffee table, facing them. The title was in bold letters, "Modern Dwellings, The Art of Living," and beneath it, a stunning photograph of a glass and cedar home overlooking a lake, with the headline, "Harrison Homes, Alex Harrison is redefining West Coast luxury." I watched their faces as they read it. Confusion. Disbelief. My mother picked it up, her hands trembling. Leo leaned forward, his smirk finally faltering. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice cracking. "This isn't you, it is me," I said quietly. I opened my briefcase and laid a portfolio next to the magazine. Page after page of my projects. Multi-million-dollar homes. Architectural awards. Financial statements that showed my company's net worth was in the 8 figures. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by my mother's sharp intake of breath. "And the divorce?" I continued, my voice steady. "It wasn't because I was a failure. It was because Sarah couldn't spend one more day of her life watching you 3 treat me like this. The final straw was 2 months ago when you asked me to co-sign another one of Leo's loans. I refused. Sarah saw that we would be fighting this battle for the rest of our lives. She left because she loved me too much to watch you destroy me. My divorce is the price I pay to finally get free of you. The air in the room crackled with unspoken emotions. Shock was the first wave, washing over their faces, leaving them pale and slack-jawed. My mother sank onto the sofa as if her legs had given out, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that had nothing to do with concern for me and everything to do with a missed opportunity. My father's authoritative facade crumbled, replaced by a raw, naked avarice that was uglier than his anger had ever been. He stared at the portfolio, then at me, his mind clearly racing, recalculating my worth, not as a son, but as an asset. But it was Leo's reaction that was the most telling. His jealousy was a physical thing, a sour twist of his features that contorted his handsome face into something petty and mean. You had all this," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the documents. "You had all this, and you just let us, you let me." He couldn't even finish the sentence. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. He truly believed my success was something he was owed a share of. Then came the pivot. My father stood up, his voice taking on a sycophantic, oily tone I'd never heard from him before. "Alex, son. We had no idea. This is incredible. You've done so well." A true Harrison, he was trying to reclaim me, to fold my success into the family narrative as if they'd orchestrated it all along. My mother found her voice, and with it, her primary weapon, manipulative tears. "Oh, Alex," she sobbed, dabbing at her dry eyes. "How could you keep this from us? You had all this money, and you let us worry ourselves sick over this house, over your poor brother. How could you be so cruel?" I held up my hand, and the room fell silent. "Stop," I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of 30 years of suppressed truth. "Just stop. You want to know why I kept it from you? Because I built this not just without you, but in spite of you. My drive came from every time you overlooked me. My discipline came from knowing no one would ever bail me out. My success is mine. I earned it in the dark. While you were busy shining a spotlight on him, I looked directly at Leo. You are not my responsibility." Then I turned to my parents. "And I will not give you one single cent to clean up his mess. You made your investment decades ago. You chose your golden boy. These are the returns." I calmly packed my portfolio back into my briefcase. I picked up my framed magazine cover. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door. I just looked at the three of them, frozen in their tableau of greed and disbelief, and I walked away. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from their drama instead of trying to fix it. And as I closed the door softly behind me, I felt the monumental weight of their expectations lift from my shoulders. I was free. The days following the confrontation were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. My family, having failed to get what they wanted through shock and awe, resorted to their old playbook, a full-scale guilt and pressure campaign. My mother was the primary aggressor. She left tearful voicemails, her voice trembling with manufactured despair. "Alex, the bank called again. We have to be out in 60 days. Your father's health is failing from the stress. How can you sleep at night, knowing you've done this to us? Knowing your own brother might be homeless? After everything we've done for you." The phrase, "everything we've done for you," was particularly galling, a fantasy they had repeated so often they'd started to believe it. Then came the flying monkeys, extended family members who were getting the heavily edited version of the story. My uncle called, lecturing me on family loyalty. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years sent me a sanctimonious text message about honoring thy father and mother. They were painting me as a heartless, Scrooge-like figure, a secret millionaire who had turned his back on the family that had nurtured him. The one saving grace was a call from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who saw the lopsided family dynamic for what it was. "Alex," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm not calling to pressure you. I'm calling to tell you that I see you. I've always seen you. They're telling everyone you're a monster, but I know the truth. Don't you let them make you doubt yourself for 1 second." Her words were a balm on a raw wound. In the midst of the chaos, my chosen family rallied. Gus called me the day after the confrontation. Heard through the grapevine there was a little dust up, he said in his typical understated way. Just remember, kid. You can't use money to fix a broken character. You did the right thing. My best friend, Dave, took me out for a beer and let me vent for 3 hours straight, just nodding and saying, "They're unbelievable, man." Absolutely unbelievable. The most surprising call came from Sarah. Aunt Carol, it turned out, had called her too. "I heard what you did," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so proud of you, Alex." That was the man I always knew was in there. The one who was willing to choose himself. Hearing that from her, after everything, felt like a crucial piece of my fractured self clicking back into place. It affirmed that our divorce, as painful as it was, hadn't been an ending but a necessary, agonizing breaking point that had finally forced me to stand up. I held firm against the onslaught, letting the calls go to voicemail, deleting the texts, and leaning on the people who had earned a place in my life. The wall of silence I presented to my family was the most powerful boundary I had ever built. As my mother had tearfully predicted, the consequences of their choices arrived right on schedule. Without my bailout, their financial house of cards collapsed completely. Leo's creditors were relentless, and since my parents were co-signers on almost everything, their assets were his. The bank foreclosed on the family home. The sale happened quickly, a quiet auction on the courthouse steps. The place where I had grown up, the monument to their priorities, was sold for just enough to cover the primary mortgage and some of Leo's debts, but not all of them. They were forced to sell off furniture, my mother's jewelry, my father's prized collection of vintage watches, anything of value to appease the remaining creditors. Their pride was the biggest casualty. They had to move from their sprawling suburban house into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of the city. The shame was palpable. My father, a man who had built his identity on being a provider and a figure of authority, was suddenly humbled. Leo, who had never known a day of real hardship, was forced to declare bankruptcy. The flashy cars were repossessed, the credit cards were cancelled, and he had to take a job working at a big-box retail store to begin the long, slow process of paying back what he owed. I heard all of this through Aunt Carol, who delivered the news without judgment. I felt a strange mix of emotions, not pleasure, not schadenfreude, but a grim sense of cosmic justice. It was the inevitable outcome of a lifetime of irresponsibility. While their world was shrinking, mine was expanding. I had started therapy, finally unpacking the decades of emotional neglect and learning to untangle my self-worth from their approval. I sold the house Sarah and I had shared, a beautiful home that now held too many painful memories of my struggle to appease my family. With the proceeds, and with a clear vision, I began designing a new home just for myself. It was on a piece of land overlooking the ocean, a project that was more art than architecture. It was a testament not to my wealth, but to my freedom. I poured my energy into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. My company thrived. My employees were my family, and we celebrated our successes together. I was healing. I was building, not just houses, but a life that was authentically and unapologetically my own. The silence from my family was a gift, allowing me the space to finally hear my own voice. About a year after the confrontation, my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in months. It was my father. I let it ring for a moment, my heart rate quickening, before I decided to answer. His voice on the other end was different. The booming, authoritative tone was gone, replaced by something quieter, thinner. "Alex," he said, and then there was a long pause. I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, as if he were calling from the street. I've been thinking. Another pause. "I drove by that lakeside house you built. The one from the magazine. I just sat there for an hour, looking at it." He took a shaky breath, and the words that came next were the ones I had waited my entire life to hear, even though I no longer needed them. "We were wrong, son. I was wrong. I was so focused on propping Leo up, on making sure he looked like a success, that I never even bothered to look at you. I never saw you. I knew you built an empire while I wasn't looking. I'm proud of you, Alex. I'm so damn proud." It wasn't a perfect apology. It was gruff, incomplete, and born of his own humbling. He didn't apologize for the pain or the neglect, but for his blindness. Yet, it was genuine. It was a start. I found I wasn't angry anymore. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a calm, clear space. "Thanks, Dad," I said, and the words felt surprisingly easy. "I appreciate you saying that." He asked if we could get coffee sometime. I hesitated, then agreed. We met a few days later at a small, neutral cafe downtown. It was awkward at first. He looked older, worn down by the past year. He told me about their new life in the apartment, about how my mother was coping. He told me Leo was still working his retail job, that he was quiet now, humbled. He never once mentioned money. We just talked. For the first time, it felt like he was talking to me, Alex, and not to the family's designated fixer. I didn't offer to help them financially. The boundary was set in stone. But I did offer him a relationship, on new terms. A relationship based on mutual respect, where I was a son, not a safety net. He accepted. It was tentative, fragile, but it was real. As for Leo and my mother, I knew that would take more time. Reconciliation is not a single event but a process, and this was just the first, cautious step on a long road. Looking back on it all now, from the vantage point of my new life, the clarity is stunning. The day my divorce was finalized, sitting in that cheap motel, felt like the absolute nadir of my existence. I saw it as a symbol of my failure as a husband and a man. But I was wrong. That motel room wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The divorce wasn't a failure, it was a desperate, painful act of self-preservation that finally broke the chains of family obligation I'd worn my entire life. My wife, Sarah, leaving was the catalyst that forced me to finally confront the real source of my unhappiness. It wasn't my marriage that was broken, it was my relationship with my own self-worth. For years, I had been seeking validation from people who were incapable of giving it. I thought that if I just worked harder, achieved more, maybe one day they would finally see me. The great, liberating truth is that I didn't need them to see me. I needed to see myself. My secret success, which I had guarded like a dragon hoarding gold, wasn't just about money. It was about creating a space in the world that was mine, a testament to my own value, built on my own terms. The confrontation with my family wasn't about revenge, it was about claiming that space as my own. It was about drawing a line in the sand and declaring that I would no longer be a resource to be tapped, but a person to be respected. The fallout, the loss of their home, the humbling of my brother, those weren't my fault. They were the natural consequences of their own choices, and my healing could only begin when I accepted that I was not responsible for them. Today, my life is full. My father and I continue to slowly rebuild our relationship, one awkward coffee at a time. I have a chosen family of friends and colleagues who celebrate my successes and support me without condition. My home, the one I built overlooking the sea, is my sanctuary. It's a physical manifestation of the peace I fought so hard to find. The ultimate lesson in all of this is that you cannot delegate your own validation. Your worth is not a reflection in someone else's eyes, especially if they refuse to see you clearly. True strength, true family, and true success are things you build for yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own space in the world, please share your experience in the comments below. Let's create a community of people who know the power of building a life on their own terms. Thank you for listening.